If you're looking for a fun Halloween costume, you can dress up as Coach Franklin, and your buddy can go as a top 10 team. Pretty scary. I took a little bit of a bye week last week after seeing how disastrous Week 5 was. Little did I know that Week 6 would give us just as much if not more to discuss. I may end up breaking things up like this rest of season, as it gives me more time to focus on bigger projects. It's not often that an entire week of college football leaves me speechless, but I really don't even know where to begin going back to Week 5. The Friday night alone gave us 2 top 25 upsets and 2 registered chokes. In total, Week 5 produced 11 qualifying games, matching the season high originally set in Week 2. Franklin is never beating the big game allegations, and Drew Aller throwing another pick in crunch time has everyone wondering why he was considered a top prospect going into the season. Getting a Saddam edit in October can't be good for draft stock. But Aller isn't alone, with a lot of the other top guys like Klubnik and Arch, who have all looked extremely underwhelming. It's crazy going back to the preseason hype regarding this QB class, now that it looks incredibly shaky. I can't wait for Mel Kiper to lose his mind while teams pass on Arch Manning, though at this rate it's safe to assume he won't be declaring. Kirby Smart continues to struggle against Alabama. Even without Saban, he somehow can't beat the Tuscaloosa school. The Crimson Tide may actually be the best team in the SEC at this point, just proving that time is a flat circle. But in another damning moment, Syracuse got blown out by Duke, which makes Clemson's home loss look a lot worse. In other noteworthy moments of Week 5, we had Virginia upsetting number 8 Florida State in an electric overtime game. My prediction of Sam Pittman getting fired manifested immediately after the Hogs were blown out by Notre Dame. Bobby Petrino wasted no time in cleaning house after being assigned the interim role, while also suggesting he wants to be considered for the full-time gig. Notre Dame somehow clings to relevance and might seriously be in the conversation come December. In another Nostradamus moment, Illinois upset our friends in Los Angeles, meaning they will somehow waltz into the playoff as a 2-loss team, assuming they lose to Ohio State this weekend. The chokes in Week 5, while plentiful, lacked a lot of substance. In Minneapolis, Greg Schiano reminded us why he's the whole reason my calculation exists. Rutgers raced out to an early lead, but Schiano, proving he just refuses to learn from prior experiences, tried a 56-yard field goal on 4th and 22 instead of trying to go for it like Bielema did in Piscataway last season. Maybe you missed that one, but Scott Satterfield is apparently a quiet viewer of the series, because instead of blowing his chances to win against Kansas, the Bearcats pulled out the upset in Lawrence. The Big 12 may look a lot different than it did a few seasons ago, but the allegations of not playing defense may never go away. Iowa had a chance to knock off Coach Sig before remembering that scoring more than 13 points isn't in their nature. The Hoosiers graciously rewarded them with 2 points at the end of the game as a thank you for letting them escape Iowa City unscathed. Pitt had a 17-0 lead against Louisville early in the game. Then they attacked a ball boy. The Panthers were coming off a bye week, so that made it back-to-back games they blew a double-digit lead. Narduzzi is really making a case for his termination. In fact, he's prompted a new feature to my weekly analysis in the hot seat. This won't contain all of the collegiate coaches running from their AD and board of directors, just the ones that make an appearance on the worst chokes. With Pittman out, he takes a seat firmly next to Sunbelt Billy. Mississippi State registered a choke hosting Tennessee, though I have a hard time dragging this team considering the turnaround the program has made recently. They had chances late in the game, but just couldn't get it done. Oregon State choked a game against Houston on Friday night. It's pretty sad, all things considered. We can just refer to the Washington State segment from the 2024 Top 10 to explain why. Trent Bray actually finds himself ahead of Napier considering the Beavers' winless start to the season. This choke is actually so bad considering how far Houston had to travel for the Friday night game. We usually see these cross-country trips resulting in the visitors coming out flat, and while the Cougars did, they weren't going to coug it like their fellow Big Cats from Pullman. Friday night had another big choke in Sun Devil Stadium when TCU blew their own 17-0 lead. Kenny Dillingham's squad found themselves on the right side of the comeback this time around, and TCU saw their AP ranking vanish almost instantaneously. Again, a qualifying game that looked more like a solid effort by the victors than a collapse by the inevitable losers. Wake Forest would have been next on the list, but I'm giving them a ref exemption after a missed offsides let Georgia Tech escape with an overtime victory. Wilcox saved his own job and put Bill O'Brien firmly on the hot seat with a cross-country comeback against Boston College. This was another back-and-forth game that was actually more entertaining than it was a choke. Same with Stanford coming back against San Jose State, because we always have at least one team that won a choke come back to choke their own game away next week. More importantly, the worst choke of Week 5 came during a rematch of the 2024 Sun Belt Championship game. Marshall had a 34-17 lead late in the third quarter. The Herd have struggled early in the season. New head coach Tony Gibson already choked that game against Missouri State. But Louisiana doesn't look primed to make a repeat appearance themselves after early season losses to Rice and Eastern Michigan. The Herd would hold the Ragin' Cajuns to a field goal, and then quickly march into Louisiana territory before missing a lengthy attempt of their own. Louisiana then took a play from the Charles Huff bag. Starting QB Daniel Beal had thrown back-to-back picks and was benched for backup QB Lunch Winfield. What a name. Of course, the backup would quickly lead 2 scoring drives to tie the game. With 4.5 remaining, Marshall had the chance to march down the field and take a late lead in the now-tied game. By the 2-minute warning, they found themselves inside Louisiana territory. The now almost empty Ragin' Cajun Stadium didn't result in much stadium pulse, and they scored an impressive touchdown to retake the lead. However, they didn't take time remaining into consideration, leaving Louisiana with a minute to match. On 4th and 1 near midfield, Marshall commits encroachment to extend the game instead of ending it right there. Naturally, a few plays later the game would be tied. Louisiana would immediately score in the first OT, though Marshall would answer on 4th and goal. But they'd be held to a field goal at the start of the second OT. But that backup QB, Lunch Winfield, that came in and led 5 straight scoring drives, including 4 straight touchdowns, wasn't going to be denied his shot at the starting job. On 2nd and 7 from the 10, he called his own number and called game. Tony Gibson may be in his first season at Marshall, but with 2 massive chokes under his belt, he takes his place firmly on the hot seat. That brings us to Week 6, with 6 qualifying chokes of its own, though the biggest storylines are actually what happened outside of our registering criteria. Somehow Penn State's loss to UCLA was so bad the Nittany Lions never had the lead and thus never had a win probability above 75% in the second half. There's not much I can say about this game that you haven't already heard, such as it being 40 years since an 0-4 team upset a team ranked in the top 10, or that, going into Pasadena, James Franklin had won 34 straight against unranked opponents, or maybe that Penn State has yet to beat a Power 4 team this season. Their best win is Nevada, a team that has 1 win through 6 weeks. UCLA had recently fired head coach Deshaun Foster after the Bruins' 0-3 start. Former Fresno State head coach Tim Skipper assumed the interim role, but it's recently promoted offensive coordinator Jerry Neuheisel that has everyone talking. The 33-year-old is setting himself up to take over the full-time gig if the Bruins and Nico can continue to find success. They should probably figure out the headset situation, though. Apparently, there were multiple instances of Neuheisel forgetting to engage his mic and communicate with his quarterback. It's funny that it really just makes things that much more embarrassing for Penn State. On the other hand, James Franklin should be on the hot seat. Perhaps that Halloween costume can be modified to include UCLA and not just top 10 teams. The preseason number 2 overall team is now unranked, alongside the preseason AP number 1 in Texas. While Sark likely isn't on the hot seat just yet, Arch Manning definitely is. Arch looked bad, there's no way around it. Just another topic that's been discussed ad nauseum at this point. But it's best exemplified by backup Matt Caldwell coming in for 1 play to keep the Longhorns' hopes alive, just for Arch to return and throw a terrible pass on the very next play. Texas and Penn State joined Clemson, South Carolina, SMU, Kansas State, and Boise State as preseason AP Top 25 teams that are now unranked. We're not even halfway through the season, and 28% of the group has dropped out. Probably not abnormal, but considering 3 of these teams were in the top 4, that has to count for something. In other noteworthy moments, Narduzzi and BOB faced off for the Hot Seat Bowl, and Narduzzi, starting a freshman quarterback, absolutely wiped the floor with Boston College, so for now we'll put Bill ahead of Pat on the hot seat. Also in the ACC, Dabo may have officially put Belichick on the hot seat after a 35-3 halftime score sent fans in Chapel Hill to focus on preseason basketball. Diving into the worst chokes of Week 6, UTSA continues to struggle on the road, falling this time at Lincoln Financial against Temple. Though with an RCS of 0.3, this game hardly counts as a choke. New Mexico coaching legend Mike Locksley did it again by blowing a 20-0 lead at home against Washington. Locksley complained last year when James Franklin ran up the score. Maybe he should learn sometimes that's what it takes to put teams away, because allowing 3 touchdowns in the fourth quarter will put any game on the knife's edge. The funniest part is that Maryland had a chance to lead a game-winning drive of their own, but after being asleep at the wheel for nearly half the game, they couldn't help but throw it away. Terps QB Malik Washington may just be a sleeper agent with that last name. We return to the MAC as first-year Ball State head coach Mike Uramovich got his first conference win, overcoming a 14-0 halftime deficit thanks in part to Ohio's inability to move the ball in the second half. Pete Lembo, the man that got the previous Ball State head coach fired, made sure he once again showed up on the worst chokes by narrowly escaping Eastern Michigan. Buffalo had to lead a 90-yard drive in 40 seconds just to tie the game with a 50-yard field goal. Butch Jones and Arkansas State got a bit of a funny upset when Texas State found themselves ahead 6 late in the game. A 2-play touchdown drive almost put the game out of reach, and yet a missed extra point proved the difference when the Red Wolves would match that score with almost no time remaining and actually make their PAT. The worst choke of the week belongs to a regularly discussed program at this point, where Kansas State had a 14-point lead to start the fourth quarter when visiting Baylor. After forcing a turnover on downs deep in KSU territory, the Wildcats were looking at a 96% chance of victory. Unfortunately, Sawyer Robertson is the QB that talking heads should actually be all over, because on Baylor's next drive, 3 passes carved the Wildcat defense to make it a 1-possession game. Dave Aranda must be a fan of analytics because he also chooses to go for 2 and further cut the deficit to 6. I like this a lot, actually. I feel like we see it all the time now. Coaches down by 14, score a touchdown, and then choose to go for 2. In my experience, I don't recall it being often successful, but it's interesting to see it work here. Especially as during KSU's ensuing drive, a wayward pass is intercepted and returned the distance. Just like that, Baylor had taken the lead with over 4 minutes to play. Unfazed by the mistake, Johnson's next pass attempt goes 62 yards and puts the Wildcats deep into enemy territory, though the drive stalls out and they end up settling for 3. The Bears' offense struggles with their chances but manages to get just inside their kicker's range, setting up a 53-yarder that barely clears the uprights. KSU wasted no time getting themselves to the edge of field goal range, but with time running out are forced to attempt a 56-yarder that is blocked, sending the team that started the season ranked 17th to 2-4 on the year, along with their second choke in 6 games. As far as cumulative RCS goes this season, they find themselves behind only UConn and Marshall. Like I said at the outset, many of these games weren't the disastrous collapses that captivate us, especially considering the pointing and laughing at teams like Penn State and Texas, despite them not making an appearance on the list. As the rest of the season unfolds, I anticipate the blunders will get worse and worse as teams get more desperate to try and turn things around. Until next time.